I'm Willa, a 28-year-old nurse who moved to Chicago 3 years ago to build a new life. For 5 years, I diligently saved every penny I could, building a nest egg of $47,000 for a down payment on my dream home. After a recent family reunion in Nebraska, I stopped at a gas station and checked my bank account. My heart sank. Every cent was gone. When I confronted my dad, he just shrugged and said, "We needed it more than you," as if he hadn't just shattered my world. If you're watching, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Hit that like button and subscribe to become part of our storytelling community. Have you ever had your parents take advantage of you? Share your experience in the comments, and let's have a conversation about family boundaries. My troubled childhood and path to independence. Growing up in rural Nebraska, my relationship with money was shaped in ways I'm still trying to understand. Financial stability was a foreign concept to my family. My parents were always in motion, hopping from one rental house to another as landlords grew tired of their overdue payments. My dad, Frank, was constantly chasing a quick win at the local casino, while my mom, Linda, found solace in shopping to cope with his gambling. New shoes or a designer purse were always on sale or too good a deal to pass up, even when our refrigerator was empty. As the oldest of 4 kids, I learned responsibility at a very young age. My brothers, Tyler and Mason, and my sister, Abby, all looked to me when things went wrong, which happened all the time. I'll never forget the winter I turned 12. The temperature dropped to -15 degrees Fahrenheit, and I woke up at 3 a.m., shivering under 3 blankets. The house was freezing because my parents had forgotten to pay the electricity bill for the 3rd month in a row. I gathered my siblings into my bed, piled all our blankets on top of us, and told them stories until morning to distract them from the cold. We could see our breath in the air as I wove tales of magical worlds that were warm and safe. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would never be financially vulnerable. I would build security for myself no matter what it took. By 15, I was working at the local grocery store after school. My parents seemed proud, telling everyone how responsible I was, but they didn't hesitate to ask for just $20 for gas or a little help with the phone bill. My paychecks seemed to vanish into a black hole of my family's financial problems. I started hiding money in a hollowed-out book under my mattress. It was only a few dollars from each paycheck, but it was something that was truly mine. When it was time for college, I knew I was on my own. I applied for every scholarship I could find and still had to take out loans. I chose nursing because it offered job security and a good salary. Over the next 4 years, I worked as a hospital aide, delivered pizzas, and tutored other students in science. I survived on 4 hours of sleep a night and way too much coffee, but I graduated with honors and a job offer from Chicago Memorial Hospital. Moving to Chicago was the first time I put my own needs first. My parents acted like I was betraying them when I told them I was leaving Nebraska. "Who's going to help us with rent?" Mom asked, as if my financial contributions were an unwritten rule. Dad was more direct, asking, "You think you're better than us now with your fancy degree and city job?" I went anyway. I found a small studio apartment in a safe neighborhood and started working 12-hour shifts. Every month the calls would come. Mom needed money for Abby's school supplies. Dad's car broke down. Tyler was short on rent. There was always some emergency. For the first year I gave in more often than not. The guilt was overwhelming. "We gave you everything," Mom would say, conveniently forgetting the nights without electricity or the school lunches I didn't have. But gradually I learned to set boundaries. I started saying no, and the calls became less frequent. Meanwhile, I was saving. I set up automatic transfers to my savings account with every paycheck. I packed my lunch instead of buying food at the hospital cafeteria. I used public transportation instead of buying a car. I found free activities on weekends instead of spending money at bars or restaurants. Every sacrifice was worth it because I was working towards something tangible. A home of my own. Security. The thing I had yearned for my entire childhood. After 3 years in Chicago, I had saved $47,000. It had cost me everything. Overtime shifts, holiday pay, and a minimal social life. But I was so close to my goal of $50,000 for a down payment. I'd even met with a mortgage broker who pre-approved me for a loan. There was a small bungalow in Ravenswood with a tiny backyard garden that I'd visited 3 times. I could see myself there, planting tomatoes in the summer, sitting on the porch with a book in the spring. It was listed at $285,000, a stretch, but within my reach if I was careful. I'd been so focused on my goal that my communication with my family had shrunk to occasional text messages and brief calls on birthdays and holidays. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd been home to Nebraska. 2 years of peace, progress, and building something for myself. The reunion and a growing unease. Then my mom called about the family reunion. The call came on a Tuesday evening in late June. I was just getting home from a grueling shift in the ER. My scrubs sticking to my skin in the summer heat. Seeing Mom on my caller ID made my stomach clench with a familiar mix of love and anxiety that defined our relationship. "Willa, honey, it's been too long since we've heard your voice," Mom gushed when I answered. "We miss you so much." "Hi, Mom. I miss you too," I said, slipping off my shoes and collapsing onto my couch. It wasn't a lie. I did miss my family, or at least the idea of what a family should be. "How is everyone?" "Oh, we're just fine. Your dad's got a new project going. The boys are busy with their jobs, and Abby's doing great in school. But listen, that's not why I called. We're having a big family reunion in 3 weeks. Everyone's coming. The Johnsons, the Petersons, even Aunt Martha from Arizona." My grip tightened on the phone. Family gatherings inevitably meant financial pressure. Gifts to bring, expectations to meet, and usually by the end, requests for loans that would never be repaid. "I don't know, Mom," I hedged. "Work is really busy right now, and I don't have much vacation time saved up." "Willa," she said, her voice taking on that guilt-inducing tone I knew so well. "It's been almost 2 years since you've seen your family." "2 years. Your brothers and sister ask about you all the time. Do you know Abby has your nursing school graduation picture by her bed? She tells everyone her big sister saves lives in Chicago." The weight of obligation settled on my shoulders. "It's not that I don't want to see everyone. Your father wants to talk to you," Mom interrupted, and before I could protest, Dad's gruff voice came through the line. "Hey, kiddo," he said, sounding more upbeat than I'd heard him in years. "How's my big shot nurse doing in the Windy City?" "I'm good, Dad," I replied cautiously. "Your mom says you're hesitating about the reunion. Come on now. We're proud of you. Want to show you off to everyone." My daughter, the healthcare hero. His praise, so rarely given during my childhood, caught me off guard. "Thanks, Dad. It's just hard to get away from work." "You work too hard. Always have. Time to come home and let your family remind you what's important. Family sticks together, right?" Before I could respond, I heard scuffling and then multiple voices. "Willa." It was Abby, her 15-year-old excitement bubbling through the phone. "You have to come. I want to show you my art portfolio. I might get a scholarship like you did." Then Tyler, now 24. "Sis, it's been forever. I've got a serious girlfriend now. Want you to meet her." And finally, Mason, 21, and the quietest of my siblings. "We miss you, Willa. It's not the same without you bossing us around." Their voices stirred something in me. Nostalgia and the pull of shared history. Despite everything, they were my siblings. I practically raised them through our parents' chaos. "Okay," I heard myself saying. "I'll see what I can do about getting the time off." The cheers that erupted made me smile despite my reservations. After finalizing dates and promising to call with my travel plans, I hung up and stared at the ceiling of my small apartment. Had I just made a terrible mistake? The next day I requested vacation time. To my surprise, my supervisor approved it immediately. "You never take time off, Willa," she said. "It'll be good for you to see your family." In the weeks leading up to the reunion, I shopped for gifts. Nothing extravagant, but thoughtful items for each family member. A sketch set for Abby, who was showing real artistic talent. Video games for Tyler and Mason. A cookbook for Mom, who always claimed she would learn to make more than the 5 dishes in her rotation. A nice shirt for Dad, though I hesitated over that one, remembering how he'd pawned gifts in the past. The morning of my drive to Nebraska, I checked my bank accounts one last time. $47,322.18 in savings, $1,245.36 in checking. My little financial fortress, the result of countless overtime shifts and sacrificed social engagements. I felt a surge of pride mixed with anxiety. Just a little more, and I'd have my down payment for the bungalow. The drive from Chicago to my hometown of Millfield, Nebraska, took 8 hours. With each mile that passed, I felt the independent adult I'd become in Chicago receding, making way for the responsible eldest daughter I'd always been to my family. It was like watching myself shrink in the rearview mirror. When I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, the first thing I noticed was Dad's truck, newer than the rusted pickup he'd been driving when I left. Mom greeted me on the porch, wearing a blouse I recognized as being from an expensive boutique in Omaha, one we could never afford when I was growing up. "You're here," she squealed, pulling me into a hug that smelled of unfamiliar perfume. "Everyone's so excited to see you." Inside, the house looked different. New furniture had replaced the sagging couch and chairs. The kitchen had been updated with stainless steel appliances. A large flat-screen TV dominated the living room wall. It was jarring. Growing up, we'd been lucky to keep the lights on. Yet now everything looked almost prosperous. "Wow, the place looks great," I said, trying to keep the confusion from my voice. "Did you guys remodel?" "Just a few updates here and there," Mom said vaguely, taking my overnight bag. "Your father's business ventures have been doing better lately." Business ventures. That was a new term for gambling. Throughout the afternoon, as relatives began arriving for the reunion's kickoff, I noticed similar comments. Uncle Jim clapped Dad on the shoulder and said, "Looks like your luck finally turned around, Frank." Cousin Sarah complimented Mom's designer watch. Aunt Patricia asked if they had won the lottery. Each comment made the uneasiness in my stomach grow. My father had never held a steady job, bouncing between construction gigs and get-rich-quick schemes. My mother had worked part-time at a local dress shop, but it had never been enough to support our family's needs, let alone luxuries like the ones now on display. When I asked Tyler about it later, he just shrugged. Dad says he made some smart investments. Mom's been acting like she always knew they'd hit it big. "What kind of investments?" "Press." "I don't know. He doesn't share details. Just started buying stuff a few weeks ago. The truck, Mom's jewelry, the TV. Said the family deserves some nice things for once." The timing nagged at me. A few weeks ago, right around when they'd invited me to the reunion. That night, as the extended family gathered for a barbecue in the backyard, I pushed my concerns aside. Maybe Dad really had gotten lucky. Maybe things were finally looking up for my parents. Maybe I could stop worrying about them asking me for money. As I helped Mom carry desserts out to the picnic tables, she looped her arm through mine. "It's so good to have you home, sweetie. You know, your father and I were talking. Maybe you could move back to Nebraska now. The hospital in Omaha is always hiring nurses. You could find a nice place nearby, be closer to family." The suggestion caught me off guard. "I have a good job in Chicago, Mom. I'm happy there. But aren't you lonely all by yourself in that big city? Family should stick together." Before I could respond, Dad called everyone to attention for a toast. Standing there in the golden evening light, surrounded by smiling relatives, I almost let myself believe that everything was normal, that I was just a daughter home for a visit, not the emergency financial backup I'd always been. The feeling didn't last long. The first full day of the reunion was filled with the chaotic energy of too many relatives in too small a space. Breakfast was a buffet of casseroles and coffee cakes brought by various aunts and cousins, served on paper plates in the backyard. Children darted between adults' legs while my dad held court near the grill, laughing louder than necessary at his brother-in-law's jokes. I was sitting on the porch steps with Abby, looking through her impressively mature artwork, when I noticed my dad slip inside the house. Nothing unusual about that, except that my purse was on the kitchen counter where I'd left it. A small alarm bell rang in the back of my mind, but I dismissed it. This was my father after all. Despite his flaws, he wouldn't steal from his own daughter, would he? Will, what do you think of this one? Abby asked, pulling me back to the present as she held up a charcoal sketch of an elderly woman's face. It's beautiful, Abs. You've really captured something in her eyes. Wisdom and kindness. It's Grandma Henderson, she said proudly. From the last photo we have of her. As we continued talking, my phone chimed from inside my pocket, the distinctive notification sound from my banking app. I pulled it out to check, but before I could unlock the screen, Mom appeared with a platter of deviled eggs. Willa, be a dear and help me serve these, she said, effectively cutting off my chance to check the notification. Throughout the day, my parents seemed unusually interested in my life in Chicago. Not the normal questions about whether I was dating anyone or if I liked my job, but specific questions about my apartment building security system, whether I used online banking, if I had investment accounts. Just curious about how our big city girl manages her finances, Dad said with a wink when I asked why he wanted to know if I had two-factor authentication on my accounts. After lunch, the reunion activities shifted to the local park, where the extended family competed in sack races and egg tosses. I found myself partnered with my cousin Ethan, a financial advisor from Des Moines I'd always gotten along with. Your parents seem to be doing well, he commented as we waited our turn for the three-legged race. Yeah, apparently Dad's investments paid off, I replied, still not entirely convinced. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Uncle Frank investing. That's unexpected. What's he into? Stocks, real estate? He didn't say. To be honest, I was surprised too. Well, good for them, I guess, Ethan said, though he looked as skeptical as I felt. Just unusual to see such a dramatic change so quickly. When we returned to the house that evening, I noticed my laptop wasn't exactly where I'd left it on the guest room bed. The angle was slightly different, the lid more closed than I remembered. Paranoia perhaps, but I checked the browser history anyway. Among the usual sites, email, news, social media, was my bank's login page. I hadn't checked my bank account on my laptop that day. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I changed all my passwords that night, using my phone's cellular data rather than the house Wi-Fi. But I didn't confront my parents. Not yet. Part of me didn't want to believe what the evidence was suggesting. The second day of the reunion brought more family activities and more strange behaviors. Mom asked to use my phone to make a call when hers was charging, though I later saw it plugged in at nearly full battery. Dad took me aside to show me his investment documents, which turned out to be vague printouts from websites about cryptocurrency and day trading. When I asked specific questions, he changed the subject. That evening, the family gathered for a formal dinner at the local steakhouse, a place we could never afford when I was growing up. Dad insisted on paying for everyone, pulling out a new credit card with a flourish that made me increasingly uneasy. As dessert was served, he stood to make a toast. To family, he said, raising his glass. The most important thing in the world. When times are tough, family sticks together. And when times are good, family shares the wealth. That's what it's all about, taking care of each other. Everyone murmured in agreement, clinking glasses. I sipped my water, watching my father's performance, because that's what it was. A performance. The jovial, generous patriarch was a role I'd never seen him play before. After dinner, as we were preparing to leave, Mom pulled me aside and handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a gold bracelet with a small diamond charm. A little thank you gift, she said, clasping it around my wrist before I could object. For being such a wonderful daughter. Mom, this is too much, I said, genuinely confused. My parents had never given me expensive gifts. Birthday presents growing up had been practical items like socks or school supplies, if they remembered at all. Nonsense, she said, patting my cheek. You deserve nice things too. The bracelet felt heavy on my wrist, like a shackle rather than a gift. The final morning of the reunion, as I packed my car to return to Chicago, my parents hovered anxiously. Are you sure you can't stay another day? Mom asked for the third time. Take Monday off too. I'm sure the hospital wouldn't mind. I have patients expecting me, I explained again. And a meeting with my mortgage broker on Tuesday. Dad's eyebrows shot up. Mortgage broker? You buying a place in Chicago? That's the plan. I've been saving for a down payment. There's a bungalow I've got my eye on. Something passed between my parents, a look I couldn't quite interpret. Well, money isn't everything, Willa, Dad said, putting his arm around me. Remember that family bonds are what really matter in life. As I drove away, waving at my family gathered on the porch, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. But I was also relieved to be heading back to Chicago, back to my independent life where I called the shots. That relief was short-lived. The betrayal. I was about 4 hours into my drive back to Chicago when my gas light came on. I pulled into a roadside gas station, stretching my legs as I filled the tank. The reunion had been exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not just the constant socializing but the undercurrent of unease that had followed me throughout the weekend. When I went inside to pay, I handed the cashier my debit card. She ran it once, then frowned and tried again. I'm sorry, ma'am. It's declining, she said, handing it back. That was strange. I had plenty in my checking account for gas. I pulled out my credit card instead, which thankfully went through. Back in my car, I opened my banking app to check what was going on. I expected to see a temporary hold or perhaps a fraud alert. What I saw instead stopped my heart. My checking account balance. $432.74. My savings account balance. 10 cents. I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. This had to be a mistake, a glitch in the app. I logged out and back in again. The same balances greeted me. With shaking fingers, I navigated to my transaction history. There they were, a series of transfers over the past 3 days. $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, all transferred to an external account I didn't recognize. $47,000. My entire savings gone. The panic hit me in waves. First came disbelief, then confusion, then a horrifying realization. The browser history on my laptop, the strange questions about my banking, my parents' sudden prosperity, the expensive gift that now felt like a bribe. My own parents had stolen from me. I pulled over to the shoulder of the highway, my vision blurring with tears and my breathing coming in short, painful gasps. A panic attack was building, my chest tightening as though an elephant were sitting on it. I forced myself to breathe. In for 4 counts, hold for 7, out for 8. The same technique I taught anxious patients in the ER. When I could think clearly again, I called my bank. After navigating a frustrating automated system, I finally reached a fraud specialist who confirmed my worst fears. Yes, Ms. Henderson, there were several large transfers made from your accounts over the past 3 days, she said. They were authorized using your credentials on a device that's been used to access your account before, though not your primary device. My laptop. They had used my laptop. Those transfers weren't authorized by me, I said, my voice breaking. I need to report this as fraud. I understand, Ms. Henderson. Can you tell me who has had access to your devices or might know your login information? My parents, I whispered, the admission painful even to my own ears. I think my parents did this. There was a brief pause. I see, she said, her tone softening slightly. We'll need to file a formal fraud report. This will involve the police, especially given the amount involved. Are you prepared to do that? Was I prepared to report my own parents to the police? The thought made me physically ill, but $47,000. My down payment, my security, my future. Yes, I said. I need to do that. After arranging to visit my local branch in Chicago the next day to complete the paperwork, I sat in my car, staring blindly at the cornfields stretching alongside the highway. I should continue driving to Chicago. I should put as much distance as possible between myself and my parents. Instead, I turned the car around. The drive back to Millfield passed in a blur of rage and hurt. Questions circled in my mind like vultures. How could they do this to me? Did they ever intend to tell me? Had the entire reunion been a setup to gain access to my accounts? It was early evening when I pulled back into my parents' driveway. The big family gathering was over, but Tyler's car was still there along with Mason's motorcycle. But I wanted witnesses. I didn't knock. I used my old key and walked straight into the living room where my parents were watching their new TV. Dad had a beer in his hand. Mom was scrolling through her new iPad. They looked up in surprise when I entered. "Willa," Mom exclaimed. "Did you forget something, sweetie?" The casual greeting, as if nothing were wrong, as if they hadn't just destroyed my life, snapped something inside me. "Where is it?" I demanded, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. "Where is my money?" Dad's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight tensing of his shoulders, but his voice remained casual. "What are you talking about, kiddo?" "My savings," I said. "The $47,000 that was transferred out of my account over the past 3 days while I was here, while you had access to my laptop and my phone." Mom glanced nervously at Dad. Tyler and Mason appeared in the hallway, drawn by the tension in my voice. Abby peeked out from behind them. "Willa, calm down," Mom said. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." "The explanation," I cut her off, "is that you stole from me. Your own daughter. You emptied my bank account. Money I worked overtime for years to save for a down payment on a house." Dad set his beer down and shrugged. Actually shrugged, as if we were discussing a borrowed lawnmower rather than my life savings. "We needed it," he said simply. Those 3 words, delivered with such casual entitlement, hit me like a physical blow. I staggered slightly, grabbing the wall for support. "You needed it," I repeated, my voice rising. "You needed my money for what?" "The new truck. Mom's designer clothes. The TV. Things you couldn't afford on your own, so you decided to take from me instead." "Now hold on," Dad said, standing up. "We raised you. Put food in your mouth and clothes on your back for 18 years. You owe us." "I don't owe you my future," I shouted, no longer able to contain my rage. "I worked 3 jobs through college. I pulled 80-hour weeks at the hospital. I saved every penny while you two spent money you didn't have on things you didn't need. And now you've taken everything from me." Mom was crying now, but I recognized the tears. Not genuine remorse, but the manipulative display she'd used throughout my childhood to deflect responsibility. "We were going to pay you back," she sniffled. "Once your father's investment comes through." "What investment?" I demanded. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Your cousin Jerry has a business opportunity. Cryptocurrency mining operation. Guaranteed returns within 6 months. Double or triple our investment." I laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Cousin Jerry, who's been arrested twice for fraud. That's where my money went." "It's a legitimate opportunity," Dad insisted. "And family helps family. Or young. You can save it up again." The casualness of his dismissal struck me speechless. In the shocked silence, I became aware of my siblings watching from the hallway. Tyler looked horrified, Mason confused, and Abby was crying silently. "Did you know about this?" asked them. "No," Tyler answered quickly. "Willa, I swear we had no idea. We thought Dad got lucky at the casino," Mason added. "Or took out a loan or something." I turned back to my parents. "I want it back. All of it. Now." "It's not that simple," Dad said, his voice hardening. "The money's been invested. It's going to make us all rich. You'll thank me later." "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. Mom lunged forward. "No, Willa, please. You can't do that to your own parents." "Why not? You had no problem stealing from your own daughter." "Because they'll send your father to prison," she pleaded. "Is that what you want? To break up this family?" I looked around the room at the new furniture purchased with my money, at my father's stubborn expression, showing no remorse, at my mother's manipulative tears, at my shocked siblings. "You broke this family," I said quietly. Not me. I walked out, ignoring their calls to come back, to be reasonable, to think of the family. In my car, I sat shaking, tears streaming down my face. My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from my parents, but I ignored them. As the shock began to wear off, the practical implications of what had happened hit me. Rent was due in a week. I had less than $50 in my checking account. My credit card was almost maxed out from recent expenses. My carefully constructed financial safety net had vanished overnight. I checked into a cheap motel 30 minutes away, unable to face the 4-hour drive back to Chicago in my emotional state. In the anonymous room with its faded floral bedspread and humming air conditioner, I curled up and let myself fall apart completely. My parents had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. They had stolen not just my money but my trust, my security, my plans for the future. And they had done it without remorse, with a sense of entitlement that suggested they believed they were justified. As I drifted into an exhausted sleep, one thought repeated in my mind. What was I going to do now? The next 3 days passed in a fog of despair. I called in sick to work for the first time in my nursing career, claiming food poisoning from the family reunion. My supervisor was understanding, but I knew I couldn't hide in the motel forever. I barely ate or slept. When I did sleep, I had nightmares about homelessness, about begging on street corners while my parents drove by in their new truck, not even recognizing me. When I was awake, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every interaction from the reunion, looking for signs I should have recognized, warnings I should have heeded. My phone continued to buzz with messages from my family. Mom sent tearful voice messages about how I was overreacting, how family needed to stick together. Dad's texts vacillated between defensive justifications and angry accusations that I was being selfish. My siblings' messages were different, confused, concerned, asking where I was and if I was okay. I couldn't bring myself to respond to any of them. The betrayal was too raw, too overwhelming. On the 4th day, a knock at my motel room door startled me out of my daze. I hadn't ordered food, and no one knew where I was. Cautiously, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. Taylor, my best friend from Chicago, stood outside, concern etched on her face. I opened the door, shocked. "Taylor, how did you find me?" She pushed past me into the room, taking in my unwashed hair, the rumpled bed, the untouched fast food containers on the dresser. "Your location sharing is still on in our friendship app. You didn't answer any of my texts for 3 days. And your supervisor said you called in sick." I got worried. The simple act of kindness, driving 4 hours to check on a friend, broke through the numbness I'd been wrapped in. I collapsed into Taylor's arms, sobbing out the whole terrible story. "Your parents did what?" Taylor exclaimed when I finally explained what had happened. "Willa, that's not just morally reprehensible, it's literally criminal.